welcome back to Thursdays on the Pagan Perspective. I'm your host, Yeka, and this week we've been talking about science and paganism. The question, as always, is posted in the box below. So to get started, wow, my cat's going a little crazy. So to get started, I was really excited when I first saw this topic. I've been really looking forward to talking about it. Reason being is I consider myself a fledgling scientist. So it's very near and dear to me. And before really getting into this, I want to talk just a little bit about what science actually is. Because we often talk about, well, this isn't scientific but, or scientifically, or science says this, or science says that. So what science is. And that's a huge topic that you can spend a very long time on. But to really kind of narrow it down, science is a few different things. First off, science is a process. Thinking back to your high school classes, I'm sure that you remember the scientific process in terms of the hypothesis and testing, etc., etc. That is science. That's doing science. Science also is a body of knowledge. Things that we have learned through the process of science. And then also you can consider science as the institution of science. So the scientists themselves, the institutions, the researchers, the funding, all of that called the journals, that whole institution is sometimes also referred to as science. However, science is not a person, science is not a system of beliefs, and in science there is not a capital T truth. Truth is something that is changing based on our understandings. So you probably remember there's hypotheses, and those are the ideas, basically. Theories, and theories are hypotheses that have a significant amount of evidence. He's being loud, so you're probably hearing him run around. Evidence that support them, and then those theories, some of them become what's the consensus theory. That's generally what is accepted by the entire scientific community and pretty much everybody else who's aware of it as well. And then when we talk about facts or truth, it's really important to remember that those are things that continue to change. And actually this week there's a really awesome example about that. I don't know how many of you have heard the news about the Genesis rock. I think it came out, so it's the 21st today, and on the 17th it came out, a paper was published in Nature talking about the structure of that they found hydroxyls in the crystalline structure of this rock that was brought back from the moon from the Apollo 15 era. And the reason this is important, I swear this is connected, is that the consensus theory of how the moon was formed, which is what we would consider as truth, science, truth, whatever, is that about 4 to 5 billion years ago, when the Earth was still molten, a large planetoid about the size of Mars crashed into the Earth, or collided into the Earth, and basically sent a bunch of material, part of what would have been the mantle, into space, which then came together and formed the moon. And that theory was supported based on evidence, based on what the composition of the rocks that were brought back during the Apollo era. Now this is exciting because this new evidence says that they found in the crystalline structure, which is like how the structure of the rock itself, when it solidified from being a liquid, that there are hydroxyl groups, which is an indication of the presence of water. That means that, I'm sorry, I swear this is actually connected. Basically that the theory that we have, the consensus theory, has some changes that need to happen to accommodate this new evidence. And that's what science is constantly, scientists have to do, is say, okay, we believed this, now there's this new evidence So how do we make that fit? Do we scrap the whole theory? Maybe the moon formed in a totally different way if there was liquid water present on the moon when these rocks solidified. Maybe, it comes from, and there's just many different options for how this new evidence is going to fit into the theory or create an entire new one. So that's the point. Science continues to change. What we understand as truth or as fact in science continues to change. So that's my long introduction spiel, just to talk about what science is. Now, what magic is, you're going to find a lot of different definitions from different people on that. I tend to think of magic as being, the definition that I really like is the art of changing consciousness at will. I will look up who said that originally and put that in the description box. It's not my original quote. But anyways, so now actually getting to the question that our viewer wrote in. Again, it's written below. They ask about good places to look for the science behind the practices of paganism. Now that's very hard to answer, first because the practices of paganism is very broad. The science behind it, is that question meaning what explains studies that explore why certain practices may work or don't work? I'm not entirely sure what the question really is asking. But my suggestion, I guess, would be based on what I think it's asking, is if you're going to look for studies, first off, don't look at the news articles that describe the studies. They're often not very accurate. Go to someplace like Google Scholar, or if your library has access to online library publications, databases, go there and look at the summaries or the abstracts of papers. And instead of using words like magic or paganism, things like that, look for what the actual thing that's being done is. My word of caution would be that unless they were doing exactly what you're doing in the study, there's so many variables that it could be totally different. So I would really suggest evaluating it for yourself, doing some self-experimentation, not really worrying too much whether it fits, whether you're really using the scientific process or not, and to see what works for you. Kind of use a hybrid of that if you need, because it might be a little bit more rigor than you're actually looking for to use the actual process. Already spending a really long time on this video. Okay, so then specifically they ask about matching the elemental type of the person, or how different energies interact, better visualizations. For the visualizations, I do have a few videos on my personal channel you're welcome to check out. The elemental types, I haven't come across anything about that. There is some very interesting, very current research being done on human microbial ecologies, looking at the different, looking at humans as basically ecosystems for microbes and the different places in our body and the different types of bodies that we have. But my guess is that isn't really what you're looking for. The way energies interact, well, it really depends on what energy you're talking about, so I'm not really sure. I haven't really found a lot that I think will help you. So they wrote back and asked another question, and I'm going to be able to be a little bit more direct on this one. And they ask if we've ever heard anything of a spirit guide sharing their energy with you, meaning that has that guide, they had the guide jump into them and felt a unique merging of energy. So yes, actually, this is an experience that I have had. I practice shamanic journeying, and very recently actually, and in the past, I've had experiences in which I have invited that spirit animal to come into me and to live in me. And again, I believe in this as a metaphorical thing. I don't believe as a actual literal thing. But independent of that, that's something that I've experienced. It's been very powerful. I don't really have any other sources of places that other people have talked about it, but I'm sure a web search can come up with something, or finding a local teacher that you might have who practices something like shamanic journeying or some other similar practice. So this was a very long video, but I hope that you found something interesting out of it. And before closing, I do want to reiterate, I hope I expressed this earlier, I don't think that that there is a conflict between science and religion or spirituality. I think that those are frameworks we use to help us understand the world. And many scientists who I know also have very fruitful, expressive spiritual lives as well. So yeah, have a great rest of the week, and